mind there, though, is that it was for God's glory that he used each of these signs, because each one of them sequentially demonstrated God's supremacy over the many false gods that the Egyptians worshipped. So, yes, God can use signs to glorify himself, and that's the only reason to do it. And so often people want to take the glory. They want to be the sign giver. They want to, I won't get into it, but it happens all the time. You can watch it on television. You can go to all kinds of things that are all about the signs, and God's has an appointment to show up that day. Well, here are some examples where we see God effectively use signs as he commissions servant leaders, that being the reason for these that I'm referencing here. God has effectively used signs to commission servant leaders. How about a ram caught by its horns when God had told Abraham, take your son and sacrifice him? There's a ram caught by his horns, and at that same moment God says, stop, and gives him the sign that there is something, there will be a sacrifice today, there will be the shedding of blood, but not your son. I needed to know that you have that kind of faith in me, that you trust me. How about a burning bush with Moses, a bush that burns but's not consumed, that draws him aside to look, and that's the point where God addresses him and tells him, take off your shoes, Moses. How about the parting of the Red Sea? Is that not a sign? A cloud of darkness, a pillar of fire. Are those not signs for Israel? That God is powerful and with them and delivering them. God even honors Gideon, a timid doubter. He honors his request with two signs. 2 times, I'll say it that way. With a wet fleece and with a dry fleece. And for Mary, the mother of Jesus, that she would find her aged, barren aunt 6 months pregnant. And so it is with so many signs. Last week in the men's Bible study, we talked about how Jesus refers to the incessant sign seekers. That's the terminology I'll use for it. Incessant sign seekers. What's he call them? He calls them an evil generation who demand a sign but refuse to believe. Well, let's set signs aside. There's other things going on here, important, serious matters. There's still this pressing matter at hand, and time is not on this man's side. It will take time to travel the 20 miles back to Capernaum. If they get started soon, they may get there by dark before it's too late to save the boy's life. And so in verse 49, this royal official said, Sir, he addresses Jesus respectfully. He says, Sir, come down before my child dies. Verse 50, Jesus says, Go. Your son will live. That could sound like an offhanded, dismissive response, couldn't it? Like, run along, kid, you bother me. Go. Your son will be fine. Well, the man, here's the stunning part of all this. The man took Jesus at his word and departed. It's the same thing that set the Samaritans apart. They took his words to heart, and they believed he was who they saw him to be. This man took Jesus at his word and departed. I think you should underline that. If you have your Bible open, you might want to underline that. You might even give it some exclamation points. There wasn't even, I believe, but help me with my unbelief with this fella. That's something that another dad who had a child in need of Jesus's touch, who sought help. It wasn't, yes, I believe, but not completely. So here again we see a progression of belief taking place. It's the key to true belief at its core. Taking Jesus at his word. That's the key. True belief at its core is taking Jesus at his word. Now, there was no need for Jesus to travel to Capernaum, no need for him to be at the boy's bedside, to take his temperature, to look at his tongue, no need to even do Jesus things like lay hands on him, pray, or put mud in his eye, and no HIPAA notice to sign or insurance paperwork to fill out. None of that was needed. Just take Jesus at his word and go. Your son will live, he told the man. That sounds like a lot of faith, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like it would take a lot of faith? And I said in the beginning that John doesn't even use that word, faith. It piqued my interest, though. What's the difference between faith and belief? And I use all the resources I can get my hands on. And this one you may have seen on the internet. It's called gotquestions.org, and sometimes there's some very good things in there. And this one is titled Faith versus Belief, and I'm going to read it to you. It begins this way, and this is where I got this information. While John's gospel never uses the term faith, faith and belief are often used interchangeably. However, the New Testament does recognize that people can have false faith or incomplete belief, which is inadequate. The difference is not between the two words, but between the concepts of mental agreement and wholehearted commitment. The difference between true belief, true faith, is one is merely a mental agreement and the other is a wholehearted commitment. In modern usage, belief often refers to mental agreement and faith refers to wholehearted commitment. As long as that distinction is maintained, it doesn't matter which words are used. However, we need to be careful not to import the modern usage back into specific New Testament passages. In the New Testament, the two terms are often used interchangeably. So there you have it. We can talk about faith and we can talk about belief. It's the heart of the matter that really counts. Is it a wholehearted commitment? This man showed a wholehearted commitment because there were no questions, there were no conditions, there was no arguing. He took Jesus at his word and departed. We're almost done here. But get this. The time of the day isn't mentioned in the start of this episode when Jesus told him to go. But when Jesus it isn't stated, but this next part tells us and raises an interesting question. Raises an interesting question and perspective on the depth of this man's belief. I can say that better. When Jesus told him go, we have no idea what time of day it was. I went back and I looked. We don't know what time of day it was, but here we're going to read this. Verse 51. While he was still on the way back to where his son was, his servants met him with the news that his boy was living. When he inquired as to the time that his son got better, they said to him, yesterday at 1 p.m, the fever left him. Then the father realized that was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, your son will live. Now, if you're a desperate dad, here's the conundrum in this. If you're a desperate dad and you'd been reassured that your son was healed and would live at 1 p.m., wouldn't you want to cover those 20 miles to get back home as quickly as possible? Wouldn't you? Just sort of makes sense. Now, some people assert that this man traveled on foot. Really? Maybe he did. But it doesn't make sense to me that a royal Roman nobleman doesn't have a shiny limo and driver. Whatever that might have been in those days. So let's say he didn't. But wouldn't he have the wherewithal, the money, the means to call Lyft or Uber to pick him up and get him back to Capernaum as quickly as possible? Don't even have to walk. Although he could have. The implications here are that his belief, his faith was so deep that he had such complete confidence in Jesus' word that he spent the night to rest and or to take care of other business. Can you perceive this? If so, that kind of belief was certainly rewarded, as the verse goes on to tell us. 53b, so he and his whole household believed. From this interaction with Jesus, Jesus telling him, go, your son is healed, him taking his words to heart, him believing Jesus had his word, he goes, delayed even getting there, finds out that his son is healed. The servants meet him along the way, and it says that he and his whole household believed. I think the emphasis here is that this is a belief of the variety that John is looking for us to have. Jesus is looking for us to have it. John is just communicating it. He's being the person to present what Jesus has done in his life and what he said and how it affected people. Now, he and his whole household believes could mean it includes his servants as well, that his whole world changed. Mine did. Nancy's and my whole world changed when we became born again believers. Our children were young. They became followers of Jesus. They read their Bible. They had Sunday school training and teaching, and they built camaraderie around that. Everybody goes their own way at some point in time because it has to be a first generation experience for each individual. So what we've seen here is another progressive pattern that shows these new believers becoming true believers. It's a very similar to the story in the book of Acts, but with Paul and Silas and the jailer who takes them back home to bandage their wounds, and his whole family comes to faith. They're all baptized. Now, there's one last verse, and it's interesting that our text here ends on a note that we saw closing out chapter 2, the last time Jesus was in Cana of Galilee. It says, verse 54, this was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. Well, it strikes me that this being called a sign was because it brought a family to faith in the court of the evil Herod Antipas, and no doubt it percolated and became a contagious type of thing that moved between all those who were exposed to this man's new transformation as a man of God. So in closing, I just want to say this. The Daily News reminds me that the world is not becoming a safer or more comforting place to live. And none of us are getting any younger either. Every day we come closer to meeting our Maker. So we do well to consider where we really stand with Christ. These are unprecedented times we live in worldwide. And being satisfied with the status quo with so many injustices ignored does not speak of the kind of believers I believe the Father is looking for. Believers who worship in spirit and in truth. That's the side I want to be found on. He could come today. I might not make it home. That's where I want to be. How about you? And I know that means to constantly be monitoring my heart, my life, my thinking, and my values so I can wholeheartedly say with confidence, now I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind. Can you say that? Do you want to say that? It's okay to say, I believe, help me with my unbelief, but I want to move to being one who can say, I'm a believer, not a trace of doubt in my mind. I'm in love. I'm a believer. He'll never leave me or say goodbye. I have to say goodbye though. Our time is up. No doubt I've got a part 2 to this. I'm in the parking lot we hope we'll be in continued communication, but it's not communication unless you reply and respond. So I hope you will, and we'll decide, depending on a lot of things, also part of that being the new spike in the COVID reports, the positives, and that could change everything. But please know that I love you and I miss you, and those potlucks that we were getting weary of, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have that again? Let's hope, let's pray, let's be of one heart and one mind. And thank you so much, and God bless you.